So my background in cybersecurity is predominantly in application security. So I have had just under 4 years of experience with dynamic application security, where I spent a lot of time learning about vulnerabilities in web applications, how to identify them, and also teaching people how to identify those same vulnerabilities. More recently, I have moved into the static application security side of things, where I see a lot more in terms of code in applications, determining if a fix is actually truly a fix for a particular vulnerability. Some other fun facts about me. I'm kind of a runner. Over the summer here, the last 4 or 5 months, I've been participating in Running Down Dementia. On Sunday just there, finished running 300 kilometres and raised about 240 quid for Alzheimer's Research UK. I am also a very big Harry Potter fan. As you can see from the picture there of me, this was taken at my hen party, where instead of a traditional bride-to-be sash, my maid of honour bought me a witch's hat that had written on it bride-to-be. I then actually went on with my husband to have a Harry Potter-themed wedding. If anyone is interested in seeing any of those pictures, you can follow me on Twitter at AwesomeSocks, where I have shared some of those pictures. Yes, my Twitter handle is AwesomeSocks. I was like 17 when I made it and thought I was really cool. There we are. I'm not that active on Twitter, but please feel free to follow me. I sometimes share some cool things, and I definitely read a lot of conversations on there. So with that background about me, you're probably wondering, why are you going to be talking about protecting kids online? It's not my job, it's not what I actually do for a living. I'm not really that involved in it in itself as a real activity of doing that kind of research. And so these two are my primary reason for being interested in this topic. This is my niece and nephew. So my sister-in-law's kids, my niece is 13, my nephew is 3. So I've been a part of their lives for the entirety of my nephew's life and 5 years of my niece's. So I've spent a lot of time looking at what they're doing with technology, how they're getting involved in all the different areas of the internet. For example, my niece, who has got a smartphone, is on lots of different apps, constantly asking for whatever is popular at the time so that she can communicate with her friends. So as you can see, they are little and large. They have 2 different areas of life, and they're both experiencing 2 different ways in which they're exposed to the internet. And so my talk is split into 2 different parts. We've got the baby to child age range, because they're very different in the way they are exposed to the internet and what they actually do online. And then we have what I deem tween to young adult. So the more interactive, the things that a young person wants to get involved in on the internet. So we will start with the younger side of things. And the first thing we're going to talk about is monitoring devices. From the moment a child is born, now we have all of these technologies that we want to be able to manage those children and make sure that they're safe, make sure that they're healthy, make sure they're sleeping well. And a lot of those devices are getting more and more connected. So we're seeing a lot more baby monitors that are connected to apps on your phone, which a lot of them now are coming with cameras and speakers, as well as the traditional listening to the child while they sleep, but also some of them are coming out with a way in which that you can also talk to whoever is in that room at the same time. And if we think about that from an attacker's perspective, if they are able to access that device, they are then able to not only see your child in their room, they're also able to potentially communicate with whoever is in that room. And some of the real potentials for that are going to be things like if you have a routine for putting your child to bed, as an example. Generally speaking, this may be more for a more high-profile person who has a huge house where there's multiple different entries to that house. Think about the fact that you maybe put your child to bed at the same time every night. There's a big gap between the times you go in and you actually go and check on the child rather than using this IoT device. And that over a period of time, say an attacker is able to watch what you do with your routine for your child, and they're then able to pinpoint the exact moment that would be perfect to go and, say, kidnap that child. These are some of the things that maybe aren't thought about when developers are creating these technologies, because security, as we all are aware, it's not at the forefront of everyone's minds. Most people probably in this room do really think about security when they go to do something, but for a lot of these devices, especially cheap ones, they're designed to function and not necessarily be secure. If you were at the talk earlier today about hacking RF, you will have learned a little bit about the wireless communications and how they are vulnerable. Anything sent over the over the internet, over any wireless communication, is potential for being vulnerable. And so just because something may be said to be secure in any way does not make it so. And a lot of these IoT devices use a number of the same frameworks and the same technologies that if one of them is vulnerable, most likely a large majority of the rest also will be. Some of the other types of IoT devices are going to be monitoring health, and for most kids, that's probably not really necessary. So things like the little sock on the left-hand side right there is about monitoring heart rate and blood oxygen levels and things like that, that for a child that may have health issues is something that may be a benefit to them. But for the vast majority of kids, that's not really something that is necessary, and also is something that could be a detriment to them, and more particularly the family in which that they are living. So take as an example, if someone was able to interfere with that data going into that device, let's say it's sent to a back end and sent back to the app so that it can be looked at from anywhere, so not just stored locally. If someone was able to make it look like your child was severely ill, yes, you might be looking at them going, no, they're not really ill, but as a maybe panicked first-time parent who trusts these devices so much, you might think, oh well, do you know what? I believe that this may be true. I'm going to rush to A&E and go and make sure that my kid is okay. As you're rushing out of the house in the middle of the night, someone might be sitting around the corner waiting for you to leave your property and maybe go in and start nicking things, or maybe being that helpful bystander who would then maybe help you close your door on their way out and actually just want entry to your home. So in the grand scheme of things with IoT devices, they are not necessarily all that secure and aren't really marketed that way. I also recently found that most of these devices, especially the medical side of things, are not approved by anyone to ensure that they are actually effective or work in any way. And so they are just sort of a safety blanket, which might actually cause more fear rather than actually help. And so with that, we have one other device that, while I was looking for examples of this, I really kind of had to think, why do we need this? So the main purpose for this device is to track your child's toilet habits, mostly for every time they have a wet nappy, you then get this tracked and get a schedule for your child. So in reality, is this really just finding solutions for problems that don't actually exist? Because you're going to have changed so many of these that do you really need to know how many you've actually changed in a lifetime? Like, is that really necessary? And again, this is probably not all that secure in terms of the data that's being entered and how it's being stored. This does also actually come with some of those other potential issues in terms of this is a whole system where you get these very expensive nappies that have a little place for the device to fit on, but it also comes with a camera, which would be the same sort of thing of those IoT devices that are potentially vulnerable. So really you want to spend a lot of money on already expensive nappies to learn about how often your child pees, basically. So moving on from there, we have connected toys. So moving on to the age of kids who are now playing with toys that are connected to the internet in some way or connected through Bluetooth. so that they can have a more interactive experience. And this particular toy, my friend Kayla, is one that it takes the recordings of your child speaking to it, and it then responds. So generically, these are generic responses that it provides, so it's not exactly like there's a person on the other end feeding back to the child. But if there was a way for an attacker to get those responses to be their own, that could be a case for actual interaction. And we'll get on to another example in just a second, that is actually a very real possibility. But this particular toy was actually banned in Germany because it was considered a listening device. So this particular toy is no longer allowed to be owned in Germany because it is basically surveillance. So if you think about a young child who's learning how to spell their name, learning what street they live on, learning a phone number so that if they ever need help, they know who to call, they don't necessarily realize they shouldn't be telling their inanimate object toy of a best friend that they live on 1234 High Street, right? And so that information is going somewhere. And so whoever has access to that information might find out a lot about that particular child and that particular family, putting them at risk. So the other toy that I mentioned is called Cloud Pets. And this is actually one that I only saw yesterday, and I thought it was kind of terrifying. It is a teddy bear that your child can speak to. It can record something where it is Bluetooth connected to a phone. So the app on your phone takes that recording from the teddy bear, sends it to a family member who also has that app on their phone. It then plays that recording to the person on the other end. The scary part is that anyone with that app who you're connected with through that app can then record their own voice recording. Send that recording back to the bear, and the bear plays that voice recording. And there's a little heart that tells you you've got a voice message. So basically, someone could be having a conversation with your child, depending on the age range, of course, depends on what's actually going to be said or what potential dangers that could be. So moving on to what can be deemed kid-safe apps. And one of the key things that I've seen from my nephew, who, again, he's 3, he watches YouTube. He watches lots of trains on YouTube, and when we're at dinner, he'll sit with a phone and he'll have YouTube on and he'll slide to choose the next video that he wants to watch. And as a 3-year-old, that's kind of scary that they have that much ability to use all of these technologies. But when it comes to kid-safe apps, YouTube Kids is branded as this is something that has lots of lockdown videos, things that are meant to be safe for kids. But actually their terms and conditions are that it will only be taken out of there if it is reported. So yes, there is management, it will be more controlled than actual YouTube, but it's still inherently a place that videos can be uploaded by regular users, and if it makes it into YouTube Kids and is actually inappropriate, it still needs to be validated and reported as something that kids should not be watching. I mentioned Disney Life here just because it is one of those, it's more likely to be safe in terms of if you're just letting them watch videos, because it's going to be the things that are on TV. It's highly regulated, whereas with YouTube is a free-for-all. You can, in theory, put whatever you want onto YouTube, and assuming no one reports it, it could stay up for a very long time, depending on the content. And with that, we're getting into more of the social media aspect of how kids are being exposed to the internet. And this takes me on to the whole industry of YouTubers, vloggers, social media influencers, people who basically share their lives online. And this comes from 2 different sides. And on this particular side, we're going to focus more on the families that are sharing this content, or the people that are sharing the content on the internet. So we have a number of family vloggers on this slide, and with that comes from people want to share their life, right? They want to show that they're regular people, that they do fun things. Maybe it starts as one of their family members is in another country and they want to make sure they're involved in each other's lives. But that comes down to, one, are the parents in control of the content actually being put onto the internet? And a lot of the family vloggers, they are. It's the parent that's doing most of the editing and putting things together, so they know what's actually going to end up on the internet. But when it comes to those younger social influencers who have come up either through a family vlog or through TV in terms of reality TV, or just because they're in kids' programs, they have a lot more freedom generally because it's their content. It's the things they want to share. And so unless their parents are particularly strict and are particularly aware of what their kids are doing on the internet, they can be oversharing a lot. They can be providing details that they really shouldn't on the internet. And until that becomes a big scandal, or until their parent actually watches those videos, it can become that they have shared too much and it becomes really bad for that particular child. And we are aware that parents are not always the best people to advise when it comes to the internet. We have an example of a family vlogger who kept taking their kids to school. They vlogged taking their kid to school. They vlogged the area that they lived in, to the point where one of their followers, found out exactly where they lived and started delivering Domino's pizzas to their house. To the point that they called the police. They had to get someone else involved because someone knew where they lived and were basically just abusing the fact that they knew where they lived. And that could have been a very, very severe, more dangerous end to that. This family has had to move home to get this to stop. And they are still vlogging. They are still vlogging their home. And they are still sharing this information with the world. And to me, that's very scary. It's one thing to vlog in your house, to share content of what you're doing day to day. But if you're giving out that private information, a regular person who just lives on a regular street, who has only ever, maybe their whole life is on YouTube, they don't necessarily have like the same contacts that a celebrity, a traditional celebrity might have, who they have not only the funds, but the contacts to have personal security, to know people who can protect them from these sorts of issues. And so, as a regular person, when you're on YouTube and you want to be seen as a regular person, but just sharing your life, it becomes a lot more dangerous. Recently, a few months ago, YouTube went down a path of saying that they were trying to protect kids online. And one of the things that they did was, for any videos that had kids in it that seemed to be doing something that could be deemed, and I say could be deemed, inappropriate, they started to demonetize videos and disable comments. And this primarily was on family vlog channels. One of the examples that I came across was a family where their young son did gymnastics. And for all of the videos that they posted, the primary videos that remained demonetized when they complained about this were the ones with their son doing gymnastics. He was doing a sport that he loved. He's only 5, I think. And YouTube were basically saying, your child is doing a sport that someone might find that they can use for their own horrible reasons and find pleasure in them in a really horrible way, and you are being at a detriment because you're putting this on the internet. So your child is now not being able to share what they love because someone else might be doing something bad. This all came about because the advertisers for YouTube found out that there was people making horrible comments in videos on some of these types of videos, and they claimed that YouTube claimed that this was to protect the kids, but in reality, it was to make sure that their advertisers were happy so that they could keep making money off their advertisers. And so, it is good to hear that companies are thinking about this and are considering what is being put onto the internet, but in this particular instance, YouTube did not go the right way in terms of trying to protect kids. They were inherently protecting themselves and just basically making it easier for someone to make use of a video, because the videos still were online. It wasn't that they were breaching copyright or breaching terms and conditions to the point of being taken off the internet. They were just taking away the potential livelihoods of the kids in these videos, because some of these vloggers, that is their entire life. They make money off the videos that they produce, and so any of those videos being demonetized, that kid was potentially out money because that is what their parents do for a living. So really they were hindering those children in their lives rather than helping them. One of the other topics here is those social media influencers, the young kids that have all of their social media accounts. The content that they put up, of course, should be being monitored by their parents. So even the teenagers who maybe they have a right to be on these platforms, the content that they share should definitely be monitored by their parents, because what they share online, especially the more famous they get, the more well-known they get, the quicker things spread, the quicker rumours spread about anything that they say. And with that, we're moving into the slightly older side of the talk here. We've got the tween to young adults. And a lot of the vlogging stuff there runs into this, right? It's kind of shared. With YouTube, it predominantly affects pretty much everyone. Anyone on YouTube can share too much, but when it comes to a kid, they often don't have a choice. They often don't understand what they should and shouldn't say. So we then have these young people who are just starting out their life in social media. They are getting their first phone. So I remember when I got my first mobile phone, I was 11. It was a Nokia, it had Snake on it, and it had a Harry Potter cover. I've liked Harry Potter since then. And it didn't do anything that phones do today. Kids are getting younger and younger as they get their first device, which means they're getting younger and younger at being able to use any of the apps that are available on those devices. And that's the first topic we're going to talk about. So the mobile apps in which kids are using these days, I'm not that cool with the kids. I don't know exactly what all of the apps are being used, but these are just some of the ones that I am aware of, and some of them I do actually use myself. So the main reason why I bring up these particular apps, at least Words with Friends and Fortnite, are in particular that if you looked at these apps as a parent who doesn't use these particular apps, you may not know that there is a way to communicate with anyone on these apps. So anyone who uses Words with Friends, you request to play a game with a random stranger, you both make a move and instantly a chat function comes up. You can talk to that person. You can say whatever you want to that person. They can say whatever they want to you. And for a kid who has just got their first phone, who thinks, oh, this is really cool, I can make a friend, they are not necessarily aware of what they should and shouldn't be saying and who they should and shouldn't be talking to. So my point for these particular apps is when I looked at the descriptions for them, trying to look at it from the point of view of someone who is not particularly security aware or internet aware, nowhere did it say on Words with Friends that you can have a proper conversation with someone that you don't know. So there is no adding someone who's in your area, there's none of that, it's just you start a game with someone, it opens a conversation. So to many parents, this app may be okay, you're playing Scrabble with your friends, basically. But actually, it's a lot more serious than that in terms of that functionality to communicate with the wider world, because that child could be talking to anybody and could be saying anything to anybody. So when it comes to the experiences of my 13-year-old niece who got a phone a couple of years ago, for every app that she downloads, it's a quick glance at what type of app is it. And for the most part, it's very hard to tell what actually is in that app until you've gone into it. And until you've actually played it, until you've seen what is being done within that app. Many of them are just games. They're just playing a random game like Candy Crush as an example. It is just a single player game where there's many others that are not, and it's very hard to tell. So as a parent, how are you meant to actually say yes or no without actually having been on that app yourself and actually looked into the features of it. So this in particular is just more of a, how do you make sure that the kids, as they use these apps, are protecting themselves and are aware of the functionalities within those apps and making sure that they are safe with what they do. People are potentially more familiar with Pinterest and Reddit as more of a community-based application, but as I said, for parents who maybe aren't in this particular interested in these sorts of apps, they may not know if they don't dig deep into what is going on with those applications. So this is just a small subset of the types of apps that are potentially dangerous for kids on their mobile devices, and we will move into the slightly more scary ones. So a couple of things about these true social media apps. As a parent, you're more likely to know what these are and what the types of functionality are, and that they are predominantly to do with sharing content. They are to do with sharing updates about your life, talking to people, and sharing pictures, all of that sort of thing, right? That is what these predominantly are for. But kids don't necessarily know what they should and shouldn't share. They aren't necessarily aware of the fact that a lot of the content on these sort of platforms contain a lot of fake information. So we've all heard fake news, but even a picture of your best friend on the internet could be completely different to what they look like in real life. And something that is not talked about enough is that the internet is not a true representation of someone's life. Something I've heard a lot going around is this talk of IRL friends. So heard a lot of things on Twitter of people talking about their IRL friends. And for anyone who's not sure what that means, it means in real life friends. So there's this disconnect between the people that you know in real life, the people that you physically go out and see, you go to school with, you go to work with, they are your in real life friends. And this puts a really bad image of the internet to young influenceable. Sorry, I'm not sure if that was the right word. Kids that are getting onto the internet, they're seeing the internet as a fake place, right? The people on the other end of the screen aren't necessarily real because they're not in your real life. But actually the internet is people's mostly real life. They're sharing what they're doing every day. They're sharing pictures of their lives. And so this term of in real life really puts that disconnect between people that you know and people that you don't, and the people that you're talking to on the internet. And it does need to be more of an awareness of what actually happens on the internet is true, is real, is things that other people can see, is a person on the other end. And that comes down to a lot of the bullying that happens on the internet. And you can see it a lot in internet trolls who just want to mess about and poke fun at people. And it does come down even to true real life situations. It makes it easier to bully someone in your school, for example, because you then know that person and you know their social medias and you can then create fake accounts. There's no accountability on the internet because you don't have to prove who you are to have an account. So many kids these days are making fan accounts so that they can talk about that particular person or group that they like. And then when something happens again about someone that maybe they have deemed is an enemy of their particular fan or their particular celebrity they're a fan of, they then end up having this horrible conversation between fan groups where they start hitting on each other, for example. And that's something that is, generally speaking, not something that would happen in a physical world. You wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of arguments, you wouldn't say the same sorts of things to each other in a real world setting. And that doesn't make it better because those things can be said anywhere, and it's something that very much needs to be an awareness for parents and awareness for kids to understand what happens online. So I want to get into a little bit about these social media apps or sites because they do have age restrictions. So I double checked because I knew that there was about 13 is generally speaking the age restrictions for most social media apps, and that's true. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they are all minimum age of 13. And I guarantee you everyone in this room has known someone or seen someone on social media who is not yet 13. And if that happens, all that these companies say to do is, here are the steps to delete that account, right? As a parent, if your child under the age of 13 has created an account, here's how to delete it. I guarantee you there is at least one person in this room who knows a family member or a friend who has created that account for that child, put in fake information so that that child can have an Instagram account, a Facebook account, so that they can talk to their friends who their parents have also created an account that they should not have. If those accounts are reported as them being underage, they also have to verify that that child is under 13 before they will disable it. And I understand why, in that if they are over 13, then that seems a bit unfair. But in the grand scheme of things, if it's obvious that child is under 13, there should be better mechanisms to protect those kids from this social media life. There is one that I particularly want to mention, and you may have noticed I haven't mentioned it yet. That is WhatsApp. When I looked at the age restrictions for WhatsApp, WhatsApp's age restriction is 16 plus. WhatsApp in itself is text messaging. It's an internet service to text a number that you have. Yes, you can guess a number, start texting random people, but you could do that with a regular messaging service, which you get with your phone. There is no age restriction with that particular app on your phone. So something that really I don't personally understand is, why do you need to be 16 and generally speaking a little bit more mature to have a WhatsApp account to be able to text a direct message to a direct number than you do to be able to share your entire life with the world? You know, on Facebook, you could add everyone that you are shown to be a potential friend, someone you might know, and you can be 13. You could be as young as 13 or younger, because we all know that happens. And social media is a very scary place when it comes to the next generation, just because it is sharing of so much content and so much of it is fake. So much of it is portrayed in a particular way that young people don't necessarily understand, nor do parents. A lot of adults don't necessarily see the true nature of the dangers of social media. I will personally admit that I have a little bit of issues when it comes to social media. I tweeted yesterday that I was doing this talk, and the whole night was going, how many people have liked my tweet? And I know that's bad. And that is something that if I'm doing it, a kid's also doing that. They're feeling valued by the number of likes that their posts are getting, and the number of comments that they get, the number of people that share it. That's something that people are taking value in, and it's because of this social media culture. And it's definitely something that we need to make sure the next generation are aware that just because someone doesn't like your tweet or someone doesn't particularly like you, doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means that someone has a different opinion, and that's okay. But on social media, for the most part, you have a different opinion and you say that to the wrong person, you end up with a lot of other people who just speak louder than you. So, how do we protect kids from all of this stuff? For the most part, kids should be protected by their parents. You know, parent is the one that's giving them a phone, the parent is the one that's giving them permission to do what they want to on that phone. So one of those things is parental controls. So whether that is through the device itself, through any of the mechanisms that are available from the platforms. As an example would be one, making kids use YouTube Kids to a point. But a lot of the time on parents that I've seen saying things like, I don't want to look at my kid's phone because my child should have privacy. And in the most part, those kids are maybe 13, 14, and that parent is basically saying they should have a free-for-all on the internet because they need their own privacy. And with that, I understand some of it, but I guarantee before the internet, before mobile devices, any kid that wrote in a diary, their parents were looking at that diary if they found it, right? And they wanted to know, mostly to make sure that they are okay. Make sure their kid is happy, healthy, all that stuff. But if you give your kid an unlimited access to their device, and you never ask them what's on it, you never find out what they're doing, what apps they're using, you have no idea what's going on in that child's life, and that can be very scary. So one other thing that is a way of protecting kids from their devices is monitoring apps. So I'm sure some of you have seen advertised an app that you can put on your child's phone, and it either shows you all of the apps that are installed, allows you to see pictures that are sent, those sorts of things. Those apps are aimed at parents with young kids or with kids with phones, and we all know they can be used maliciously. I personally don't recommend putting an app like that on a phone without telling that child. I personally believe that those kids should have knowledge of how much they can do on their device and have an open conversation between the child and the parent to make sure that anything they do online is something that they can talk about, something that they can bring up. If they are experiencing bullying, for example, on the internet, they can come and talk about it. But as a 13-year-old at the youngest in terms of these social media apps, monitoring that device, whether it be through an app or just even every couple of days, every week, every whatever regular conversation with that child, watching what they're doing. They're sitting on the sofa with their back to you because they don't want to look at you. Having an ability to talk with that child and make sure that you see what they're doing on that device. Make sure that you see what conversations they're having. To make sure that they're aware of what they should and shouldn't be doing online, having that conversation, being open with them, is something that we definitely need more of, because kids are inherently doing and talking about things that they really probably shouldn't or should be a little bit nicer to each other. If everyone was a little bit nicer to each other, the internet would be a much nicer place. So, next up, and almost there, is who holds the responsibility? So, we've talked about these apps and the things that people use them for, and I do believe that these companies should be really thinking about how to protect the people that are using the apps. We all know apps are created and immediately someone has a malicious way to use that particular application. And so I'm not saying don't create anything. That's definitely not the way to go. But we do need to have measures in place, and we are getting better. There are ways to report different posts, report comments, those sorts of things, but we need them to be easier to see. We need kids to be aware of them. A lot of the time, people have these accounts for so long that they aren't familiar with the new additions because no one necessarily tells you. If something's added to Facebook, do you actually get a step-by-step of how to use it? Most likely not, right? So parents may not be familiar with the ways in which they can protect their kids and encourage their kids to report potentially dangerous things on the internet. Then we have parents. We've talked a lot about parents and their responsibility with protecting their kids online, and a lot of it comes down to open communication, ensuring that while they're being taught how to be a human and how to converse with people, which I'll admit I'm not very good at the best of times, these kids need to be taught how to behave online. It's not just it's just online, that's okay. It needs to be an actual social issue of being able to communicate with each other. We then have the kids themselves. So I'm sure you're aware, babies do not have a choice. That's entirely up to the parents. When a newborn is put on the internet, pictures, videos, whatever, that is the parent. That is entirely on the parent to make sure that they are protecting that child. But as the child gets older, into the days in which they are being allowed to go outside with their friends, they're getting a device itself, that's when they start taking on their own responsibility. So what you put online, as soon as you have access to an account and you can read and write and you can share things, that becomes part of your responsibility. I would say not entirely, because you generally learn from the people that you are surrounded by, but you're still responsible as a 13, 14-year-old who is sharing content. You need to be aware of what you're doing on the internet, and that does come with mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. But a lot of that comes from feedback from parents and feedback from friends and the community to make sure that they are doing their best with what they have. And then we have schools and government. So there are programs in place for teaching cybersecurity, teaching how to behave online. And actually just yesterday was talking to someone who had said that they went into a school and were doing a cybersecurity talk. They were explaining to kids that when you take a picture of your friend, you make sure you have their permission. And at the same time, the head teacher of that school was taking pictures of all of the kids of that particular person. And when questioned, when queried, they didn't really understand why that person didn't want their picture taken. And they were like, well, what's the problem? And they just didn't want their picture on Facebook. And that head teacher had clearly not actually listened to that conversation. They had not actually taken in, because they said, oh, but that talk was for the kids. So why would the adults need to also learn those things? And that's a really important fact of the people around those kids are telling them how they should behave. And so they also need to be educated as much as the kids themselves do. And when parents are unaware, bad things can happen. So while I was organising, putting together this talk, I had seen previously lots of people had shared fake competitions, I suppose, from illegitimate websites, right? Or unofficial accounts, right? So this is two examples of three people that are on my Facebook, who all three of these people are parents. Two of them work with kids for their day job. And they all shared two separate Domino's pages that were not real. They both had the same post about winning 2 free large pizzas. That's not really something that is unlikely for Domino's to do. But if you see the picture on the right-hand side there, that's the real Domino's page. It's Domino's Pizza with your little blue circle with a check mark in it. They had not taken the small steps to make sure that that was a true, legitimate account, and had shared it anyway. I actually did speak with these people and just sort of said, these aren't true accounts, be careful. And one of them had said that it was their friend that had shared this with them, and they would go back and share that with their friend, because these are simple steps that are ingrained in the applications, but aren't necessarily known, and aren't necessarily aware for lots of parents. And two of these particular parents are very well educated on working with kids because they work with kids. They do understand lots of cybersecurity in terms of sharing information, and that they can't share pictures of kids without parents' permissions, all of that sort of stuff. But when it comes to their own lives, they're not necessarily as educated as we need them to be. I don't actually know what the end game of this was. It was probably just fishing for information, email addresses, credit card numbers, whatever they asked for to get your 2 free pizzas. I didn't feel like wanting to share it because that would be a bad example, right? And so with that, I want to end with a picture of my kids. This is my cat, Dobby, and my dog, Chips. And they are just misbehaved all the time. If you want to follow me on Twitter, as I said, awesome socks, and thank you very much for listening to me. Does anyone have any questions before I... Yep.
Right. In terms of the sort of companies and stuff, you could always turn around and say that to make sure underage accounts are made, have proper ID verification, but then what crosses the line of the personal privacy that the companies then take in between the privacy elsewhere?
Right, so I actually believe there is talk of making a way in which, this is kind of going a bit off topic, but there is a way of they're trying to create identification platform, a centralized location where you prove that you're over the age of 18. So this comes from, I think it came from a podcast actually where I heard this, in terms of trying to access adult websites, and that there is going to be attempts to make it that you can't access them without this centralized identification. So I definitely don't think that every single company you sign up for should have access to your passport or your driver's license or your birth certificate. There should definitely be a centralized way of doing that, but that is something that would create some type of accountability when it comes to being on the internet.
Just on that, there's something that the government use at the moment, I can't remember the name of it, but basically for an adult to identify themselves, you go through a third party. So say, for example, you've got a bank account with Barclays or the post office, you register with them and they then vouch for that individual to the government. So maybe
that would be the sort of idea, The problem there is obviously what type of third party, right? You need to trust the third party with your information. Not that a lot of people really care, because many people with FaceApp, if anyone remembers, so many people were like, I'm already giving my information to Facebook, why do I care? But actually, this is a whole other company that you're doing exactly the same thing with a bajillion other companies, and it's not actually good. Yep.
Hi, I think the helpful idea of age verification as a way to create accountability has been sort of heavily criticized as not actually doing that. And while I agree that we need to have cybersecurity training both on the developers and the app side and also with parents and in schools, I wonder how many did you speak to families of kids when it came into your research when talking about sort of the internet and safety, or is this, because I find that there's really no difference between the internet and the offline world. If you come from a good family, these things or whatever, a good living situation, that these problems won't necessarily be with those kids that it seems to be that we're talking to now. I think it's important to look at what are the offline problems that are causing these online problems that we have.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. A lot of it comes from the social life that the kid has offline can affect their online presence, but I know personally my family were pretty well informed when I was young. I still made many mistakes online, and so that is definitely a big aspect, but it's something that all of those things need a little bit more protection for kids. Everything needs a little bit more. When it comes to where I was researching this, most of it came from internal family. So if I was to do another talk, which I may end up doing, I would want to branch out a little bit more into the wider community and see what other people feel is where these issues come from.
So what does that look like to you, branching out in terms of the sample size of what we want to look at?
I'm not very much of a research person, so I would have to investigate that to see where I would go with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm mum, 2 kids, various ages. All sat on right at the back. His daughter as well, and probably my own sending because I bring to events like this. But I absolutely agree with you about having direct conversations. We have a lot of those, and also, their school are very good and very aware and do a lot of that, and they also send out a lot of stuff to parents as well, which is good. But I know that a lot of parents who are not as involved in this kind of industry do a lot of reliance on those parental controls. And she's got around those parental controls, and I'm sure there's plenty of the kids who've got around those parental controls. I think, I had a conversation with Apple about their parental controls, so it just didn't work.
Right.
And they were, she was getting around, and still does get around them all the time.
I'm sure, yeah.
Which is very frustrating. But she also knows that I will pick up her phone at any time. And like we're also mentioning about privacy, I'll pick up her phone, I know her password, and we'll look at her accounts and all the rest of it. And the stuff that I'm not keen on, then we will have a conversation. And I do think that, parents everywhere really need to do because I think we don't always understand the pressures on the kids right from a very young age. You know, that 13-year-old barrier, you know, it's not a barrier to any kid who wants to sign up for an account. And so if we did have something where there was some verification, I think generally that would be a really good improvement. But I appreciate also from the company's point of view, that would be a barrier to people getting onto their site as well. So
it's a little bit of compromise.
To do that. So I think again it needs kind of some bit more on a stick from government.
As for the barrier in terms of age restriction, I do feel like companies probably don't want that in general because they know a lot of their users are young. They know that they would lose a lot of their market if they did put those restrictions in place. I praise you for the way you're raising your kids.
I'll manage that because obviously, as has been said, my goals up there as well. One of the things that I did when she first moved over to the prices is explain to her regarding what things can happen with the install apps. This is now her 4th year now she's come to it. And, you know, she's gone along that process and learning. And I've got so much respect for her because when it comes out to put an app on, she comes and asks me, says, Dad, can you review it before I install it? And I've got so much respect for her because I've actually been through that with her. She's able to do that. And that gives me a lot more faith in what she does. But I make sure that she registers everything with an email account that I've got access to. And that's why the way I control it. So I know what, if she's going to register stuff, she's not going to separate the email account. I've got control of that. And any kind of second factor authentication I can enable.
It's the way to do it. Is the parental side of things is really important. Any other questions? Yep.
Thanks. How do you think it's going to change over the next 5 years or so?
Depends how much people talk about it. You know, the internet's always changing. Everything we do online is always changing. So it very much depends on the way anything goes in terms of, do we put in place ways of proving who you are, proving your age? Do we not? How do we then manage that? I personally don't really know. I know there are attempts to make things better, but whether or not they're in the right direction, whether they actually will do anything, I really don't know.
Do you think the cultural attitude will shift a little bit more towards getting more control?
I think as this generation get older and they experience a lot of what's going on the internet, they will then have that effect of, well, I don't want my kid to have to deal with that, so I'll teach them how to behave better. But I think that would take a while because obviously it's still very young, and that would take a bit to get out of people. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Katie.